Hey y'all, Dr. Brown back with another histology video. In this one, I really am here to kind of simplify a process. So we're going to be talking about erythropoiesis, or red blood cell production. Hematopoiesis is making blood cells, and it's complicated. This is a common chart that you'll see in lots of places. This one happens to come from Wikimedia Commons, so it's something that I can use in this video. But if you look in your textbook, you'll see a very similar image, and there's a lot going on here. And what I really want to do is for this video is really just focus in on how we make red blood cells, because this submodule is about red blood cells, and that's what we're going to be talking about here. So we're going to ignore a lot of this stuff and really focus on this part. Oh, my drawing was bad. Okay, so we're really focused on this bit here. So let's go to the next slide. Let me switch to, say, a blue pen. Cool. So all blood cells are going to start out with the same stem cell, and this is called a multipotential hematopoietic stem cell, or we're going to call it a hemocytoblast, because that's just easier for me to remember. Hemocytoblast. And the hemocytoblast can differentiate into two different stem cells. So this is a stem cell, and it can become two other stem cells. Okay, so it can become what we call a lymphoid progenitor cell. A lot of these are going to look kind of alike because, you know, Dr. Brown and his art skills. So this is a lymphoid progenitor cell. And if we were to diagram all of that out that you saw on the last slide, this cell would eventually be able to differentiate into T cells and B cells and natural killer cells and dendritic cells. But for today, we're going to leave it here. We're not going to follow this lineage anymore. The other kind of stem cell that a hemocytoblast can become is a myeloid progenitor cell, which is going to look a lot like a lymphoid progenitor cell because I'm drawing it. So this is a myeloid progenitor cell. And these guys are going to differentiate into all the other kinds of blood cells. So red blood cells, all of your white blood cells besides lymphocytes, your mast cells, thrombocytes, those are all going to come from these myeloid stem cells. Okay, so we're not interested in all of the descendants of the myeloid progenitor cell. So we have one kind of cell it can become that's going to eventually be thrombocytes or platelets. So that guy will go right there. So that's called a megakaryoblast. We're not going to mess with him right now. This guy can also become a type of cell called a myeloblast. Here, I'll make its nucleus extra big. There we go. And this is the cell that's going to become all of your white blood cells that aren't lymphocytes. We're interested in the progenitor cell that comes from the myeloid progenitor cells called the proerythroblast. So that's going to be this guy right here. And notice that this cell has a nucleus. Okay, so this is the proerythroblast. This is the one we're interested in. All of this is happening inside the bone marrow. Okay, now, hematopoiesis or blood cell formation can take place to some degree in the liver and to some degree in the thymus gland and to some degree in the spleen, but the vast majority of blood cell production is going to be happening in your red bone marrow, that is, in cancellous or spongy bone. Now, this proerythroblast has now undergone differentiation to the point where it's gonna become a red blood cell. It can't be anything else now. So this is it's terminally differentiated, and now it's just got to undergo the morphological transition from being this proerythroblast, this pre-red blood cell, to becoming a red blood cell. And it's going to undergo a series of transformations. So it's going to become a basophilic erythroblast. So something like this. Look at my art skills are amazing, guys. I don't see how you guys can stand how amazing this is. And then from the basophilic erythroblast, it's going to go to a polychromatic erythroblast. And this has to do with changes in its biochemistry. So this cell is starting to produce hemoglobin. Okay, and it's producing vast amounts of it because that's the job of a red blood cell, is essentially to be a sac filled with hemoglobin. So we're going to go through numerous steps. And what we're going to eventually end up as is a cell called a reticulocyte. And this is almost terminally differentiated, so we'll go this way. So now, don't concern yourselves with the basophilic erythroblast and the polychromatic erythroblast. I'm not going to ask you to remember those, but I am going to ask you to remember the reticulocyte. Reticulocyte. It's hard to write on these tablets. And the reticulocyte is still going to have a little bit of a nucleus. So when it's released into the blood, it's going to have a little bit of a nucleus. You'll still see some cytoplasmic inclusions. Okay, so this is what's actually released into the bloodstream from the bone marrow. So everything above this line, this is all happening in the bone marrow. But it's the reticulocyte that's released into the bloodstream. And these only last for about 3 days or so. So over the course of the 3 days between when the reticulocyte is released, it will undergo its final morphological changes. So it's going to shed its nucleus. So the nucleus gets shed out here. And finally, after about 3 days in circulation, the reticulocyte has taken on the characteristic biconcave disc shape of a mature red blood cell or erythrocyte. And this little guy can live in the bloodstream for about 120 days. Erythrocytes are anucleate. You see that the reticulocyte lost its nucleus. Now, if for some reason oxygen demand in the body goes up, you're going to produce a lot more red blood cells, right? These are produced on demand. So normally reticulocytes should be no more than 1% of the circulating red blood cells. Okay, so for every 100 red blood cells, you should see 1 or fewer reticulocytes. But if this concentration goes up, that's an indicator that hematopoiesis, particularly erythropoiesis or red blood cell production, has gone up rapidly in recent days, because these will, within 3 days, become the mature erythrocytes. So we need 3 main components in order for this process to take place. We need a hormone called erythropoietin. Wow, y'all, I'm not going to lie, it's really hard to write on this thing. Uh-oh. No, I'm not done. Continue recording. Back it up a little bit. There we go. Sorry about that. So let's erase this and try to write a little more neatly. I probably should have pre-typed this, but it is what it is. Okay, so we need erythropoietin. My thumb was hitting a button on my pen. One of these days I'm going to get this word on the page for you guys. Erythropoietin. So this is a hormone that triggers this whole process of red blood cell production. Another vital factor is iron. Hemoglobin, the main protein in your red blood cells, has 4 iron atoms per hemoglobin. And then finally, we need vitamin B12. And we need vitamin B12 to be able to produce folic acid. And folic acid is needed to produce thymine, which is of course necessary for RNA production. So the last thing I want to show you is kind of what's going on inside this cell as we make our way from the myeloid progenitor cell to the mature erythrocyte. And that has to do with the amount of RNA and the amount of hemoglobin that's present. So if we just make ourselves a little graph, it's a little crooked, but it is what it is. And so this is concentration in percent, and here's time. So as we progress from myeloid progenitor cell to pro-erythroblast to basophilic erythroblast to polychromatic erythroblast to reticulocyte to erythrocyte, what we're going to see is the amount of RNA in the cell is going to decline, and the amount of hemoglobin in the cell is going to go way up. So the solid line is hemoglobin, and the dashed line is RNA. And that mirrors the morphological process that's taking place as we go from pro-erythroblast to erythrocyte, this cell is becoming not only terminally differentiated, but highly specialized to transport hemoglobin and thereby to transport gases, predominantly oxygen and carbon dioxide. So I know that seems like a lot, but when you compare it to that, hopefully that makes a little bit more sense. So thanks for hanging in there. Study hard. We'll see you later.